This is a HeadGum podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Jeff Rubin Show. I am, of course, Jeff Rubin, joined this week via Skype and phone by Andrew Seklir and Tim Kinzy, the two guys behind the new movie, Man vs. Snake, The Long Twisted Tale of Nibbler. I'm so glad to have them here. And gentlemen, could you quickly maybe introduce yourselves, just so we have start to get a sense of who sounds like what, and maybe just briefly describe what you did on this movie?
Sure. Okay. So this is Andy Seklir, and I'm one of the director, producers, and editors of the film.
Yeah, and I'm Tim Kinzy, the other director, producer, editor of Man vs. Snake.
All right, so let me attempt to set this up. This is a movie, a documentary, about people competing for the high score in the arcade game Nibbler. Nibbler, for those who are unfamiliar like I was, it's a pretty obscure arcade game. It's kind of a mix of maybe Pac-Man and, Snake, the game where the snake keeps getting longer and you can't touch your own tail. Right. Am I describing it correctly, guys?
Yeah, you summed it up right. I mean, it's definitely reminiscent of Pac-Man in that it's a maze game, and the objective is to go around and eat up all the dots. Although in Nibbler, the dots are called croutons. And that game Snake that a lot of people remember from their Nokia cell phones, where you go around and you eat the dots and you go longer and longer, and you have to avoid hitting yourself. So yeah, that's it.
Is there a direct lineage between Nibbler and the Nokia game, which I believe was called Nibbles?
Nibbler, took a lot of variations. I thought the game on the cell phone was called Snake, but there were other games.
I've seen it called Nibbles. I've seen it called Nibbles for sure.
Oh, so maybe, yeah.
Not necessarily on the phone, but like a version. Sorry, not necessarily on the phone, but like a version. I've seen a version of the Snake getting longer game, but Nibbler is sort of none of them are sequels to Nibbler. Nibbler was sort of like a weird, obscure arcade game.
Definitely obscure. Not so weird, but definitely obscure. There weren't a lot of them produced, and the reason was that Racola Manufacturing, the company that made the game, what they ended up doing was buying a bunch of defunct or sort of, kind of bad video games from this Japanese company, SNK, which produced a game called Fantasy, which is a weird game if anyone runs across Fantasy out there. But they bought a bunch of fantasy games and then handed it to their young engineers and said, "Hey, we've got these boards, and can you guys make anything on it?" And they came up with Nibbler.
And Racola, are they still around? Did they evolve into anything?
Well, Racola at that time was, they were mainly a coin-op jukebox company, right? And so they were set up in Chicago, and Chicago is kind of an ideal place for that because all the distribution lines for running liquor, cattle, whatever, kind of all went through the Midwest because you could distribute to the East Coast, to the West Coast. And so they were primed to and they were already in the coin-op market, so they were primed to sort of take advantage of this booming arcade scene in the early 80s and realize that people were making a fortune on Pac-Man and these types of things. So they got into the other coin-op business, arcade games. But when that crashed, they kind of disbanded their video game division and kept making jukeboxes, and they're still around. They're actually they relocated, and I think they're in Torrance, California, not too far from us.
And then
not too far from us.
The other thing I think people really have to understand about Nibbler, just as background before we really get into the movie, and that what makes it different than other video game high-score competitions is sort of this marathoning aspect. Can you explain the marathoning aspect of setting a high score in Nibbler?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Well, Nibbler was it was the only game that had 9 digits, that had enough digits to accommodate a billion-point score, and also had a high scoring threshold. So
that would mean most arcade games would turn over at, I guess, 1 million, and then you'd start back at 1?
Or less.
Yeah, it would start over at 0. A lot of those games are even hard to turn over. Games like Pac-Man, Donkey Kong.
But Nibbler has 9 digits, so it went up to 1 billion.
Yeah, and the caveat is, to get it to turn over, you'd have to play for 40 plus hours on a single quarter, which apparently was done in 1984, and documented other attempts to beat that record.
So just at a basic level, how does someone, the obvious question is just like food, bathroom, that kind of thing. How does that work when you're marathoning a game?
Yeah, those are all challenges, right? Because you have, these necessary things, the body has to do, like eat and sleep and go to the bathroom while playing Nibbler. And a couple of those things are possible. You can't sleep, but you can accrue enough extra lives while playing the game where, if you walk away from the machine, your lives will slowly, your snakes will die off. But you can buy yourself, 5 minutes here or 10 minutes there to quickly go to the bathroom or, down a slice of pizza and a soft drink and then run back and grab onto the controls and keep going.
Food.
Yeah, 5-hour energy. I mean, you can drink and eat while playing the game as well. But, there's times where you just literally need to kind of walk away and put your eyes on something else so you don't go crazy, Which
makes it a little different, I think, as I understand things, than, like, for instance, the Donkey Kong record, where you have to basically pull off a perfect run for 3 hours straight. Like, if a second goes wrong, your entire run is messed up. I don't know if that's necessarily Donkey Kong, but other games. Whereas Nibbler, it seems like there's some room for error. You can build up some cushion for yourself, but you have the challenge is more the endurance factor.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, to get a perfect Pac-Man or to get a high score on Donkey Kong, you're talking a few hours, and a very precise gameplay. I mean, it's very hard to do either of those things on those games. But Nibbler, and Nibbler itself is challenging as well because in the higher levels, the games, it ramps up in speed. Like the early levels are kind of almost annoyingly slow. But very quickly it ramps up, where the snake is moving very quickly through the maze. So you have to stay alert, but you can certainly afford to freelance a little bit during these long marathons. You can try out different patterns. You can, lose a couple lives and still gain them back. Eventually, though, because of the endurance factor, you hit a wall. Right. And a lot of these players, once they hit that wall, it's very hard to come back. They start bleeding lives. They start bleeding more lives than what they've built up over time. And, that's really, that's what they call death in slow motion. And that's the thing that eventually, it's a psychological element also that the players have to battle, not let themselves get mentally defeated by the game and physically defeated by the game.
So you guys made a documentary about people competing trying to get the high score at this game, which is sort of an endurance challenge. How did you come to the subject matter? Like, why did you start making this movie? And also, I guess I'm wondering, when did you start making this movie?
Oh. Well,
because it seems to take place over a long period of time.
Yeah, a long time ago in a studio far, far away. No, we were working as editors on Battlestar Galactica back in the... Whoa,
hold up. We got to pause on Man vs. Nibbler for a second. You guys were working on editors on Battlestar Galactica? I got to get into Battlestar Galactica question. Everyone listening to this loves Battlestar Galactica.
All right.
I guess I'm wondering, like, this show, now I can stop this show, just stop you right in the middle and say, hey, we got to talk about Battlestar because I know that people are enthusiastic when they hear you edited for it. Because it's kind of become this big popular thing where I can expect people, if they haven't watched it, are at least familiar with its reputation. Certainly, if they're listening to this podcast anyway. But I guess I'm wondering, like, when you were working on it at the time, did you feel that at all, that it was special at the time? Because it was big at the time, but its reputation seems to have grown over years, right?
Oh, yeah. Well,
it was before the Portlandia sketch, but yeah,
yeah, I mean, I was on there from the first season, so and Tim joined us in the third season. So first season, we were working on it. We felt it was pretty good, but you never know, So you're working on, that was 13 episodes. So we were just working on the episodes, and we thought, yeah, this is pretty good. It's pretty fun. I think people like this. And then it did build a following, and then by the end, we were screening in theaters and at the ArcLight Theater in Los Angeles. We would screen episodes and stuff and draw big crowds, and so we knew that it was popular. And then people started doing parodies, and there was a Portlandia thing. So, yeah, I think it found a place into the culture.
I guess I'm wondering, when did you, as someone who was, like, involved and just saw the whole thing developing, like, because it's sort of an unlikely thing to get as big as it did, on the Sci-Fi Network and all. So when did you guys sense that like it was going to be something? It was like going to be bigger than I think anyone expected it to be.
I have to say, I think season 2. I think as we're getting into season 2, I realized and saw the direction that the show was going. I really thought, oh, this is going to be great. Season 1 of any series is always hard. You're figuring out what works. The writers are figuring it out. The actors are everybody's figuring it out. We were trying to figure out the visual effects, but by season 2, I think we knew that it was pretty awesome. So, and we had a lot of fun working on it.
Cool. I'm glad to hear it. All right, we got to focus on Man vs. Snake. I could spend the rest of the time talking about Battlestar Galactica. So you guys were working on one of the best shows of all time, and then what happened?
Yeah, so it was one of the best shows of all time, and we're editing it at Universal Studios, which is, in Burbank, or it's Universal City, I guess.
It's its own city.
Yeah, it's its own city, and we were in this building called the Verna Fields Building, which is named after legendary editor Verna Fields, who edited Jaws, and amongst other things. And but the building itself was rather kind of bleak. There were no windows in the building, anywhere in the building.
There's an old horse stables, right?
Yeah, and the building before it had been sort of refurbished into editing stalls, had been stalls for horses where they kept the horses when they shot westerns at Universal. So it shows you what they thought of editors. And the rooms were kind of like, small and dark, and there were like pipes running down the hallway, in the ceiling. And I'm kind of tall, so I'd like bang my head on pipes and stuff. And it kind of felt like being in a Battlestar. It kind of felt, like you're in this windowless kind of dark place with like pipes and computer screens. And we would spend a lot of hours there working away, working into the night, trying to figure things out. And so what I did was to kind of have some fun and to blow off some steam was I had built a MAME cabinet. I don't know if you're familiar with MAME, which is the multi-arcade emulation project.
So a MAME cabinet is like a home brew, an arcade cabinet with a computer in it, from which you can run multiple arcade games. Right? Am I summarizing that correctly?
That is
absolutely.
All right, keep going.
And so, I had built this thing and it had all the controllers on it, joysticks and trackball and a spinner and everything. And so we would go through the list, and there were like 3,000 games in this machine, and we would go through and play. And I really brought it in because I wanted to play Robotron and Defender, which were my 2 favorite games. But, after a while, we thought, wow, there's really just a treasure trove of undiscovered, games that I had never seen in the wild, like the ROMs in this cabinet. And one day, Tim and I just scrolling through the games, and we were playing other things, Donkey Kong Jr. I know Tim had like an Arkanoid obsession going for a while.
Well, I mean, if you got the spinner on there.
Oh, yeah. So we eventually stumbled on Nibbler, and we were like, what is this? It just, the name was kind of funny, and it was like the snake, and it looked really simple, but it was like deceptively tricky. And so we started competing on this thing. And, I would set a high score, at lunch or something. They'd come back the next day. I'd see Tim's initials at the top and they'd go, shit, and I'd get in there and like set a high score. And this battled on for a while. And I'll let Tim pick up the next.
Actually, Andy's being too kind. I couldn't come close to his score, and I was getting frustrated. And I'm like, well, I wonder if, it's an old game, but maybe there's something on, the ye old internet. And I wanted to see what the high score was, or maybe there were some patterns. And I came across like something on Wikipedia for Twin Galaxies, and there was a picture of Tim McVeigh Day for history's first billion-point score on Nibbler. And it was just the most bizarre picture to see this, young, awkward teenage boy. And the fact that it was 1 billion points, which didn't seem possible on any planet. And the fact that his name was Tim McVeigh. And so I just, photocopied this picture and put it on Andy's door just to see what kind of reaction I would get. And,
and I came back from lunch and I saw this poster on my door, and I thought, the first thing, that pops out at you is Tim McVeigh. And I saw this guy, this kind of, sullen teenager, he didn't smile, he never smiled for a photo. And so, and then I saw 1 billion points on Nibbler, and I go, wait, this is like a joke. I thought Tim had like photoshopped something together. And so like I looked it up, and I found this article that was about the first 1 billion point game that had been written back in, I guess it was 84, 85. And I just thought it was reading about it and remembering sort of the arcade culture of the early and mid 80s, and the fact that it was in this like Midwestern town. And I don't know, it seemed to me just like a great story. They locked him in the arcade overnight so he could keep playing, and his friends were there feeding him Mountain Dew. And I just thought like, this is great, and I wanted to find out right away. I was like, who is this guy? Like, what happened to him? If he had that much determination and chutzpah and just sort of like drive at 16 years old, I mean, I felt like this guy could have gone on to do anything. And so right away, I was very curious about who Tim McVeigh was,
And then, so how did you go from that to, making a documentary about basically Tim McVeigh? He's sort of the protagonist of the film. So, like, how'd you go from, like, all right, who is this guy, to we're recording you for hundreds of hours and putting together a documentary? Yeah,
well, that would sort of snuck up on us. I mean, the first thing I want to do was, like, just, is he still alive? Like, what happened to him? And I actually thought that, I liked that story so much that I thought it would make an interesting movie. I saw it kind of like as a narrative, like maybe we could do the Tim McVeigh story of getting 1 billion points. And he's like the local kid, and all these other hot shots are showing up in town, gunslingers like Billy Mitchell and Tomasaki, and these guys who are playing Pac-Man and Donkey Kong. But it's like the local kid who manages to do this incredible thing. So the idea was to go out to Iowa and try to find him, to do an interview with him, and just sort of get color about his experience doing this thing, and maybe put together a little YouTube video and just explore that story as an idea.
Is that something you do a lot as a writer, have an idea and say, let's go explore this idea, and actually like get on a plane to go do research?
Well, the thing is that, I mean, I think if you're just writing completely from your mind, of course, maybe there's no reason to do that. But, if you're doing something based on a real story, I think you have to kind of do some research. And I guess you could have done it over the phone, but, we're editors primarily, right? So like we get footage and then we make something out of it, and so it felt like so the next step really was I just went on and started Googling Tim McVeigh in Iowa, right? Like,
very difficult Google, I bet, to find other Tim McVeighs. And we should say, and you actually have to like stop the documentary for a moment to let people know, no relation to the other Tim McVeigh. Like an unfortunate coincidence, I guess. Yes, no relation to the other Tim McVeigh, and spelled differently, But it's definitely, when you hear the name, everyone goes like Tim McVeigh. Yeah. It's, you have to explain. You have to just pause and be like, different guy. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So, but incredibly, there's like, I think when I Googled it, there were like 17 Tim McVeighs living in Iowa. So, I started calling these random numbers, and some guy, hello, and you'd be like, hi, are you the Tim McVeigh who had the Nibbler world record? What are you talking about? And they just like hang up on you, And so I think I went through about 5 or 6 of these calls where people just kind of thought I was like a prank caller or something. And then eventually, we found the Twin Galaxies website and sent an email through to Walter Day, who was the arcade owner and the owner of Twin Galaxies, which was the arcade where Tim did the record. And he put us in touch with Tim. And then from there, it was all easy. We said, okay, we'll fly out. We'll interview Walter and Tim. And we interviewed Mark Hoff, who is Tim's childhood friend, who was there and witnessed the 1 billion point game. And
that seems like an unusual amount of shoe leather for, for writing something. It sounds like on spec that you were just writing because you thought it was a fun idea and you hoped to sell down the road. Is that what you were doing? And is that an unusual amount of work for it? It's impressive and it obviously paid off. But I'm wondering, is that something you usually do? Is that something you think other people usually do?
I really have no idea. So for me, it was, I wanted to do a weekend of interviews and cut something together and maybe write something, write a treatment like that. That was really it. Right. So, and that's what we did. Like we went out there. And
when was this?
That was in, Tim, remind me, that was like late.
That was January of 2008.
January 2008. Yeah.
Okay, great. Right. This is a long time ago already.
Yeah, that's a long time. Yeah, over what, 8 years ago? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a marathon in and of itself.
Right.
Yes. And because we're in the middle of, Battlestar Galactica and various other projects, it was kind of like this little thing we just did, and then we came back and we got back to editing 12 hours a week and on a TV series and doing everything, raising kids and doing all the other stuff that we have to do. But it was a little while later that Tim Kinzy flew out and did a little shoot with what was it? The video game summit.
The video game summit, VGS, and that was that was in July in Chicago, or in a suburb of Chicago in Lombard. And Walter Day wanted to honor Tim McVeigh with a certificate for getting history's first billion-point game. And I think they knew that I was coming, and it was more or less a photo op. But Tim, microphone in hand, talked about his record and his accomplishment. And there's
a snippet of that in the movie. There's a little piece of that early on in the movie. You can see the video game stuff.
Yeah, and there are a handful of people, but unbeknownst to us, that's where this fact came out that there was a disputed another billion-point score all the way from Italy, and Tim was asking Walter about, well, what about this Italian score? Because at one point it was listed in the Twin Galaxies database online that there was this other billion-point score.
And we should pause to explain briefly that the Twin Galaxies database online is like the preeminent video game scoreboard. It's probably the most official video game scoreboard, and they have a high, and it is the most official because they have a high standard for verifying scores.
Correct. Yeah.
They did, and so initially it was put up without any kind of documentation, and it was quickly taken down. But it did exist for a short period of time when Tim happened to look up Twin Galaxies on the internet. Well into the internet's infancy, and the only thing that Tim could do, and Walter persuaded him, was, well, do you think you could go for it again? And that I was not there to record that conversation that happened on the car ride home. But I think that's when Tim got the idea that he wanted to marathon and get this again, and he let us know. And that's when Andy goes, "We got to film this. This is a movie." And I'm like, "No, we're done. Aren't we done?" No,
well, yeah,
this story is starting.
Well, look, as soon as I heard that he wanted to do it again, I thought, okay, it reminded me of well, by that point, it was interesting. When we went out and filmed the first interview with Walter and Tim, we had not seen King of Kong. Like, they mentioned, oh, yeah, there were a couple other documentaries crews that were out here filming us, and I think Sundance was happening around then. But King of Kong, we had not seen it, so we didn't see it probably till that spring. And when we did see it, we thought, oh wow, that's a really good film. Let's not try to make a documentary or something. But when I heard that Tim was going for it again, I thought of films like Hands on a Hard Body. I thought of how hard it's going to be for a middle-aged guy to stay at this game for 40 plus hours. And I really thought there was inherent drama in that. And
I thought there was imminent death. I didn't want to be party to killing Tim.
Right. Yeah. Well, none of us wanted any harm to come to Tim, of course. But I thought if he wants to do it, we should, there's inherent drama in that. And there's also this theme of like middle-aged guys trying to recapture the glory of their youth. And we're about the same age as Tim. And so those things kind of spoke to me. And I thought, okay, if he's going to go for it once, or twice, we should what will it take? You go out there for a couple of days and you film it. But what ended up happening, of course, is that it ballooned into this thing where, suddenly Dwayne Richard this Canadian Nibbler player, came out of the woodwork and said, I'm going to do it. I want to compete against him. We were able to track down the alleged Italian player, Enrico Zanetti. And then, of course, none of these guys got the record on their first try. And so, once you invest a certain amount of time into chasing a story, it's hard to then kind of turn back and say, well, we're not going to do any more. You know what I mean? So it just kind of, I always say to people, we're kind of these accidental documentarians. We didn't start out to make a documentary. We weren't like, see King of Congo. What's another video game we could do a documentary on? We just kind of fell into it.
It sounds like your goal wasn't to make a documentary at all.
No, we weren't going to make a documentary, but it just kind of popped up in front of us, and we're like, well, we had these little like digital handy cams, and we thought let's just keep filming. One of the funny things in the film is that if you watch it, you can see the quality of the footage gets better as the film progresses, because the camera technology over the few years that we shot got better and better. So back when we did it, it wasn't so easy to find an affordable high definition camera to shoot, for this kind of thing. And we just kind of shot a bunch of it ourselves and edited ourselves, and yeah.
How long a period was it shot over?
Well, the bulk of it was shot 2009. That's really, we did all the interviews. That's when MagFest happened. That's when we flew to Italy and did, the interview with Enrico. Truth be told, I was going to be in Europe anyway because I was visiting my wife's family over there, and we typically go every other summer, and so it was a pretty easy trip to make for me. But sure, so we shot most of the film in 2009. And parts of it also in 2010, 2011. Tim McVeigh didn't get the record, reclaim his record until Christmas of 2011. And so it was after that we thought, okay, that's the end. He got the record. Let's go do the follow-up interviews. So we did follow-up interviews with everybody. And then really got down to the hard work of trying to boil, 500 hours of footage down into a 90-minute cohesive story.
So nothing was put together until everything was shot?
No, it was kind of put together it's kind of put together piecemeal, little segments. At one point, we tried to do like let's do a little fundraising. We'll cut together, a little trailer thing here and there. Also, we're getting, some really amazing archival footage, soon after we started filming in that January, we found this great, Tim McVeigh Day celebration.
I love that stuff because I love that like 80s video games are very new still. And there's just like this, the people reporting it don't quite understand what they're even talking about, where they're like, the video arcades. There's just that era of people talking about video games,
Right.
The first billion point thing. Yeah.
But speaking of that stuff for a minute, we found, when we were really researching, we found some of the most hilarious news broadcasts, which really weren't relevant to the movie, but like Tim and I probably have like an hour of just people reporting on, ABC News, NBC News, on the video game phenomenon, which we should just, I don't know, we should just cut something else together and just release that because it's so hysterical, the time capsule of what that is.
I'm sorry, I got you off track. You guys tracked down this footage. How did you track down this footage? You also have some great 80s Italy footage. Like, how did that come about?
Some of the people we interviewed, like Walter Day, say, oh, you want to call this person at this TV station? Basically, I called every TV station in Iowa and just asked for everything in the 80s about video games and local competitors. But our Italian camera guy was able to help us locate that Enrico Zanetti footage, which was just amazing. There's Google Translate, but sometimes you just need to talk to somebody on a phone. And Andy's Italian is far better than mine, but that was an old news story, and we're not familiar with any of the TV stations or anyway. So that was such a great find.
Yeah, there was some news. The news crews in Iowa showed up when Tim got the record, like the night. It's in the animated sequence. You see this news crew kind of burst through the doors, and they're filming. That news story we were never able to find. It had been taped over or lost, or they just could never locate it. So I thought for sure when Enrico mentioned in his interview, oh yeah, there was a news crew that showed up. I thought, well, the Italians got to be far worse, even in terms of their organization. I don't know whether it's just a perception or what, but I thought, come on, they probably reused the videotapes, So. But nevertheless, I turned to Luca, who was our cameraman, and said, Luca, if you know anybody in Italian television that you can ask about that, please do. And he said, oh yeah, I know some people. So it was about a month after returning to Los Angeles that I got an email from him and saying, hey, I think we found it. I think we found the footage. And I was so excited. And, I was just waiting, like, can they send us a clip? Can they watermark it and just send just so we can see it, And it turned out to be just, really precious
It's
stuff.
great footage. It's great footage.
Yeah. It was the holy grail of Italian Nibbler.
Yeah, and we've got, footage. And so, we got lucky because we found 80s footage of Enrico, 80s footage of Tim, 80s footage of Dwayne, walking through the mall with that, looking like a John Hughes character. I mean, we just got so lucky with that stuff. And that's something that, again, it's luck. It fell in our lap. I mean, I think some documentarians, they go out looking for a great archive to build a documentary around. And for us, we started making a documentary and then also suddenly realized, oh shit, we need to get stuff. And we're able to find it.
Help me understand show business a little better. So at the time you guys are filming this, is it still like a fun project for you two that you guys are just driving out of energy and enthusiasm? Or at this point, has it become like something that a company is involved in and is helping you produce?
Oh no, it's just us. It's just us. And I can't, and for the
it sounds
most
like
part,
you're employing like, I watched the movie, there's credits at the end, there's a lot of people in there. There's cameramen and all those sorts of things. Are you guys paying for those out of your own pocket?
Yes. I mean, some people volunteered their time and some people we paid, and there were some times where we couldn't show up to an event, they're doing something. And so we had to find a cameraman and say, hey, can you guys go film this?
Well, I guess you guys are like, part
and
of
then
the community of filmmakers.
And then we did a Kickstarter too.
And is the goal at this point, we're going to put together a movie and we're going to sell it to a distributor? Is that right? Am I using all those words correctly?
Yeah, the goal was really, for me, was just put together a movie. If we could put together a movie and then deal with it from there. We're not really, this is the first film we've ever made this way. I've directed episodic television for studios. That's a much different kind of machine that's behind you. We've both made short films and stuff where you're really just doing it yourself by the seat of your pants. And so this was kind of like the short film on steroids, or you're really, having to do this thing. So, I don't know, Tim, do you want to talk more about that? Just sort of like the long sort of stretch where we didn't really have a film, but we were still working on it.
Well, yeah. I mean, there was we call it the dark years. No, Tim had done 3 or 4 attempts and he really wasn't playing Nibbler anymore. And Dwayne had gotten the record, and we noticed that in the footage, you looked at like his earlier games versus when he got the record, certain parts of his game were acting faster. So we were really trying to get to the bottom of that. Wanted to interview the programmers and find out, I guess, what is this possible? Could a game malfunction? Does it look like someone reprogrammed the game? So we had a suspicious Nibbler game and a guy who wasn't playing anymore. And I mean, there was no ending. So you could just keep editing and edit little parts of the story, but you really don't know what the whole story is until you have the ending. You can't really do the beginning until you have the ending in mind. So we were really in this kind of stalemate kind of position. And it really wasn't until Tim got, in December 2011, I think. Yeah, when he got the record, and it's like, oh wow, we have an ending, and now we have to tie up all these loose endings and all these loose ends, and it took a while to do that. We wanted to go, interview Dwayne about his board and problem solve that, and follow up with Tim, and then there was a follow up to that follow up because as we got near the end, we needed, we have this really awesome ending that we don't want to talk about, that we're really excited about. And yeah, I mean, it was just a process that we just kind of were a part of, and we just followed it through till we were done. I mean, to me, it felt like the Blues Brothers, we're on a mission from God. Like nothing can stop us. Really felt like we just had to follow the story, and there were so many breadcrumbs just being let out for us. Here's this, and oh, wow, and here's this. And at the time, a lot of these things were major inconveniences and heartbreaks for us, but they turned out to be really interesting plot twists and turns.
When you guys spoke to the programmers, were the programmers at all surprised? Like, did they have any idea people were doing this to their game?
Well, they had known about the
Tim in the 80s, of course, right?
They knew about Tim in the 80s, and in fact, what that elicited was they made a change to the game, which made it much harder to marathon. So they got basically Ragola got word back and also sponsored this contest, like whoever gets the first 1 billion points gets an actual Nibbler arcade game. But then what that meant was they went back to the programmers and said, why are people able to play this thing for freaking hours? We need more quarters to go into the game. And so they made a modification to the respawning of the dots on the screen, the croutons, that when you die, they all respawn. After Wave 32, they all respawn, which makes it much harder to actually marathon a game. So they definitely knew about it. But, they were kind of like, they were young guys when they made the game, kind of pretty much straight out of college. Maybe they had each had a prior job, but pretty young. And, no one had really talked about this game for 25 years, So it was like, it was a little surprising to them, but they were great, and they were excited to talk about their work, and very supportive of the film. And
so was the billion point score limit an intentional thing on their part, and the idea that you could marathon it, because they must have known that to get the 1 billion points you would need to forsake sleep. Did they imagine people would ever do that? Was that like an intentional?
No.
No, not at all.
No, they were making a game, and you can see more about this. It's not in the actual film, but on the DVD that we released, there's about 50 minutes of additional material, including like a 10-minute featurette with the programmers where they really talk in detail about making the game and decisions that were made. But basically, one of the programmers, John Jogalis, went to his boss and said, hey, how many points should they be able to get? And the guy said, well, look, points are free. Quarters are hard to come by. Give them lots of points. And so based on that, he just thought, I'll do 9 digits. We'll see. And
how about 1 billion?
About 1 billion.
It is that really did capture people's imagination. Like, you have a lot of people in the movie, and I think you said it yourself earlier, like 1 billion everywhere. It really, like, the idea that it could go there. I mean, that's why we're talking about this game all these years later.
Right. Well, the first guy to do it, Tom Asaki, and that's Tom Asaki, not Thomas Hockey, as he's often confused with. But Tom Asaki was a
better than Tim McVeigh. Better than Tim McVeigh. Yeah. So Tom was an undergraduate at Montana State University in Bozeman, where he's studying physics and mathematics, and he was an early pioneer and really trying to figure out Miss Pac-Man and some of the other video games. And they got a Nibbler, and so he started trying to figure out Nibbler. And he tells the story where he goes, okay, you get 10, you have the 5 digits, right? And then it goes to 6-digit counter, and you're like, wow, that means you can get 999,000. And then he gets to 999,000, and another digit shows up, and he's like, whoa, you can get into the middle, and then another digit, you know what I mean? And so there's this thing of like you keep racking up higher and higher scores, and it keeps adding a digit to the counter. And he was like, where's that counter going to end? Like the screen is only so wide. Is it going to go to tens of millions, hundreds of, oh my God, it's hundreds of millions, and so it just it really captured their imagination. Like where's the end of the known universe? Like how far can you go? And so he was the first guy to really try and do it. But yeah, it was kind of an incredible thing, and everybody, the 1 billion somehow for everybody just seemed like this, it was like Mount Everest, this highest peak that you could get to. It occurs to me, I neglected to ask.
Hey, Jeff.
Oh, you gotta go.
Hey, sorry. Well, I do. I was hoping to drive and finish our conversation, but apparently I need the Wi-Fi. So I have a meeting I have to go into.
No.
I can try and see if it stays on the line. Otherwise, I'll have to say goodbye for now. But thanks so much. I'll listen as long as I can.
Tim, is there anything else you wanted to add before you go?
I just want to say, we're really excited about the movie and the interest that, insurgents of Nibbler players around the world, including Tomasaki, if I'm not even mistaken. But we're just really excited to share our story finally. And thanks for listening.
No worries. Thanks for making a great movie. We're going to plug it real good at the end. Don't worry.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Andy. Have a great day, guys.
All right, too.
All right, so
Bye.
Andy, now that Tim's gone, let's talk about division of labor. How do you actually edit a movie over two people?
Yeah, well, it's tough. So, as we were shooting, Tim kind of took the material and digitized it and organized it, and we would both. I think Tim did some of the early transcripts. In documentary, you want to do transcripts of interviews, which is kind of a big job, and so big. In fact, we later ended up farming that out. That's some of those credits that you saw in the end credits for people that did transcripts for us. That's not you, Jeff, is it?
No, it's me. I'm still
Tim's
here.
back.
I guess it's not kicking me off. I'm back.
Oh, you're back. Well, maybe mute your phone.
I will mute it. Yeah, I got some speed bumps. Go ahead.
Okay. But anyway, so Tim did a lot of the initial digitizing and organization of the material and started assembling scenes. And then once the shooting stopped and we did the Kickstarter and raised a little bit of money, we both sat down at our own editing phase. We had since we're editing all the time, sometimes we're on projects together, sometimes we're on projects separately. We're able to get office space together. We're basically one door apart. So I'd be in one bay and he'd be in the other. I'd be working on one sequence, he'd be working on something else. And then at a certain point, it started off as this, huge amount of footage, very long kind of project. And we kept condensing and kept cutting down and kept cutting down. And eventually, as we got it to a more manageable state, it kind of, we were able to kind of work on it more together in one room where, it really became more about structure and about making judicious lifts of material, like what parts, what can we afford to lose and still maintain the integrity of the story? What can we, what do we need to keep and definitely can't lose, And sometimes, there was a little tug of war, like, I want to keep this. No, I want to keep this, But, we'd work together on other projects. So,
were you guys working on Battlestar Galactica together, or did you meet there and become a team?
Yeah, we worked on Battlestar Galactica together. We also worked on Eureka, which is another sci-fi show together.
What is your origin story? Where did you guys meet?
Yeah, we met in the editing room. Tim came to work with us on Battlestar, and sort of went from there, and we, what else? We worked on Warehouse 13 and Caprica, which was the spinoff from Battlestar together.
Sure.
So yeah, we worked, so we had a long history of working together and friendship and making this project together. And there could be creative differences on any project. And we certainly had a few of our own, but we're good negotiators, both of us, and I think we're able to both.
Best story wins. That was sort of the motto, and that kind of got us through.
Best story wins, and don't cut the funny. That's Tim's. Tim was always his mantra: don't cut the funny. So so we were able to work it out, and then we had from there. You kind of get. Once you get a film together, you start showing it to other people, right? For the longest time, it was just us kind of trying to figure it out. But at a certain point, you need to show it to an audience. So we'd bring in editor friends of ours to take a look and get a little feedback. And that really helped refine it some more. And once we had it to a certain place, then we did a couple of screenings for sort of a larger audience just to see how it would play in a room, which is a different kind of thing and on a slightly bigger screen. So, and that all just takes time, editing just takes time and refining and all that kind of stuff. And then even from when you get sort of the locked cut, you still have all this other stuff to figure out. We had, animation that had to get finished. We had music that had to be licensed, and we had to figure out which sequence, how much music we could afford to license or not. We had to bring a composer on board and, do all those things that need to be done in making a movie or a TV show. So,
how did you guys film the actual marathons when you needed to? Was that just did you take turns sleeping, or were you also marathoning it?
Yeah, well, the first marathon we filmed was MagFest, and the idea was that we would sort of tag team. Like I would film a bit, Tim would film a bit, and we also hired a camera, like a professional cameraman, to fill in as well, because we didn't, we thought we probably, there's two players there, so even if only one of us is filming, we might need somebody else to kind of film the other player, and we had a couple of PAs. Production assistants who were there, who also, were like, look, if you see something interesting going on and Tim is up taking a nap, grab the camera and shoot. We don't care who's shooting. So, but what ended up happening there, and it's in the film, is that although we were assured that they would have Nibbler games when we arrived at MagFest, when we got there, the games weren't there. They didn't actually have any games, despite the fact that, both players had flown in, Walter had flown in, Tim's wife had flown, we'd all flown and converged on MagFest. The games weren't there. And so, I landed up going with this guy Buffet, who was the MagFest video game technician, and sort of, collecting a couple of cabinets that he then turned into Nibblers, in remarkable speed, like he wired the games in record time, let's just say. And I landed up staying up the whole night with him while he did that. So come the start of the marathon, I've already pulled like an all-nighter. I'm already like on the start of my marathon and kind of wiped out. So that was a little hitch in our plan. And so, Tim started filming, the other guy started filming, and I went and took a nap and then came down later and started filming around the time that Dwayne's board froze. But, it's challenging. And for the other ones from there, it was a combination of webcam, camera sort of on a tripod, recording the DVD, other people filming or us filming, there were many hours spent. I think Tim, when he went out to do the first Easter run by himself and just stood, just hung out in the living room for, nearly 40 hours while they were filming. So I don't know if Tim can still hear us. You might want to talk about that.
I can hear. No, Easter. Yeah, that was excruciating to see someone get that. Well, to get that close and maybe get it or not. No, there were many attempts. Easter, Andy came out there was a Labor Day run. There were also many attempts that you can't show all of this in the movie. So, I mean, obviously that was part of why we had, a 3-hour initial first cut. But because of the webcam and that you could record that straight to the web and these FLV files, that was enormously helpful just to have in a short, and it's such a small disk space to have, 40-hour marathon with just this little tiny screen with the snake moving, captured with all the audio.
I was going to say, like, live streaming really has revolutionized the way all video game players share their games, whether it's modern console games or even the classic arcade players. They set up webcams to live stream their games and record their games, and that really started with us. We kind of pioneered that at MagFest in 2009, and we were live streaming a Nibbler competition back then, and since then it really took off. It's really taken off, and that so we benefited from technology kind of emerging at that time that would allow us to get and retain that kind of footage.
So when did you guys actually finish the movie? Because I watched it this week. So
Right.
How long have you guys been done with it?
Well, I mean, we locked. Let's see. I think we locked the cut in 2014, and then from there it was a matter of all right. So 2013 we did in the September of 2013 we did the Kickstarter campaign, and then in 2014, spring of 2014, we pretty much locked the edit. And the reason it took from 2000 to 2014 is because, what happened was we finished the Kickstarter campaign, and then I, went and edited a series. And then when I was done with the series, I was like, okay, now we can lock the film. It's just like you get sucked away for 6 or 8 months at a time, where you really don't have that much time to focus on making your side project. But anyway, we locked in 2014, and then we spent the rest of 2014 trying to figure out, licensed music and get animation finished and get everything, all the pieces into the lock cut. So in 2015 we mixed the film, we colored the film, we onlined the film, and then we're done. And we submitted right away. We submitted to festivals. We got into a bunch. We went to Fantastic Fest, is where we premiered the film and won Best Picture award, and then from there, just kept going to festivals, got, distribution, then at that point, distributors start approaching us, saying, hey, we'd like to distribute your film. And then eventually lands up on Netflix, sort of the way it goes.
When was the last time you guys actually watched the movie? I imagine you know it in your bones, inside and out. When was the last time you actually sat down to watch it?
Well, we watched it, what was the last screening that we had? Was it in Iowa?
Well, no. Oh, yeah, it was. Yeah, we had one in L.A. over the summer, and then we were in Iowa in August.
Yeah. So in Iowa in August, there was the what do they call that? The video game something. I don't remember what it was called. Anyway,
I would go to that. If it was just a video game something, that sounds interesting to me. I would probably attend such an event.
Yes.
It was Walter Day and Billy Mitchell's film festival, but it was part of, I guess it was, the Twin Galaxies world record. There was a big award ceremony.
Yeah,
the Hall of Fame. That's it.
Hall of Fame. Yeah,
International Hall of Fame.
International Video Game Hall of Fame. For some reason, I blanked on that. But anyway, so the International Video Game Hall of Fame that Walter Billy would preside over, they have an annual event, usually in Ottumwa, where they present awards to luminaries in the field of video games. There was, an executive from Nintendo getting an award this year, and various people. Anyway, so as part of that, they had a film festival, and we were the marquee event at that. And so we flew out to Ottumwa, where, we'd spent a little bit of time and reunited with everybody and screened the film sort of for Tim's hometown crowd. And it was a blast. It was a great screening, a great crowd. It felt like we had really completed a journey, but that was the last place that I think I really sat and watched the whole film.
Have you guys played Nibbler recently?
Funny enough, I played about 2 weeks ago. I was over, I popped in to say hi to a friend of mine, Jace Hall, who is now the owner of Twin Galaxies. And he's working not too far from me. And so, and he has a Nibbler cabinet. So I went and say hi, and he was on a phone call. And so I sat down and played a couple games. But so it's still a good game.
Yeah, are you better at it after, reviewing endless hours of footage and footage of people talking about it?
I picked up a couple of tricks. I picked up a couple of
I should hope so, right?
Yeah. But no, I'm not any better. I mean, it's like, God, it's a hard game. It gets fast, and you really just have to, I don't know. If you don't play
there's a lot of finesse with the joystick in your hand. It's not. It looks simple. It is not.
Have you guys, now that the movie is out and it's on Netflix and people are watching it, have you gotten any feedback from the subjects in the movie, who I think are all, everyone comes out looking great. Have you gotten any feedback from them?
Yeah. Look, I mean, Tim is happy with the film. He's gotten a lot of positive attention and feedback because of it. He's a blue collar guy for many years, sort of living a quiet life with his wife, very nice, happy life and everything.
They seem like the nicest people.
Yeah. But, to have someone come out of the woodwork and say, we want to make a film about and share your story with the world, that can be kind of a scary thing. And we were kind of concerned for him, what will the exposure do to him? Will it change him? Will it have any kind of adverse effect on his life? And I think by and large, it's been positive, so I'm very happy about that. Walter and Billy both appreciate the film. Walter loves the camera and loves promoting his cause. And Billy, kind of got a little bit of an unfair shake in King of Kong. He really was portrayed as this villainous character, and he's actually a very nice guy. and very supportive of his fellow players. So
Yeah, that really comes through in the movie, definitely.
yeah, which comes across in the film. And so, it was a little bit of a redeeming moment for him. The programmers, of course, are thrilled that people know about their game from 25 years ago that had all been forgotten. Trying to think. Enrico, couldn't believe it. He even gets a little emotional there at the end of the film. I think even Dwayne, I think he, there's a little bit of controversy surrounding him in the film. But in the end, I think, we clear that up, and, he kind of walks off into the sunset, and, I think he appreciates the film. So, yeah, I think it's been positive. I think it's been a good thing. And we tried to make a film that was inspiring to people and positive, and I think we succeeded. So,
well, enough talking about it. How can people watch it? We already mentioned it's on Netflix. I'm assuming it's on virtually every streaming service.
Yeah, so it's on Netflix. It's on Amazon. It's on iTunes. It's on what else? Google Play. It's on Steam for video game players.
Oh, cool, cool.
Like that. So yeah, just go Google it, or if you go to our website, manversussnake.com, there'll be links to all the places where you can watch it.
And we have DVDs.
And you can pick up a DVD.
Blu-rays are coming.
Blu-rays are coming hopefully soon. The DVD has, just so your listeners know, 50 minutes of extra content. So you'll see other marathon attempts. You'll see funny anecdotes from the early days of Twin Galaxies, in-depth interviews with the programmers and other players that don't get much featured in the documentary. Rick Carter, for example, who is, I think, actually has the highest. I don't think it's been officially accepted by Twin Galaxies, but it has recorded the highest score to date on Nibbler. So if you like the movie and you want to see more, that's a place to check it out. I think those extra scenes are also available on iTunes as well. But yeah, and there's also other stuff on our site, posters and other things to check out. So if you want to, support a couple filmmakers, go check out the website. But yeah, so
well, guys, it's congratulations on finding this thing, just sort of stumbling across this thing, but then recognizing that there was a real story there and digging into it. And then also successfully getting the story out there to tons of people. This is like up my alley. Like, of course I had to watch this movie. But I want to tell you that I watched it after it was recommended to me by two coworkers who do not play video games, which I think is a very high compliment for such a film.
Wow, that's good to hear.
Yeah,
that's
totally.
what we want to hear. Absolutely.
So, and it's also great talking to you guys because sometimes we talk to people who are making things and they're still coming, or they're in a different part of the country or whatever. But people, if you enjoyed this conversation, if you enjoyed hearing about this, they can go watch the movie right now. They can go check it out on your website. And I hope they do because it's a really great movie. Thanks so much for talking, guys.
Thanks for having us, Jeff.
All right, take care, Jeff.
Congratulations, you just listened to yet another episode of the Jeff Rubin Show, and I want to thank you for listening, and I want to shove more of it in your ears, and I will do that, but you got to help me out. You got to go to jeffrubin.com, where every episode of the show exists for free, and you can find out about future episodes if you follow me on Twitter, where I'm at Jeff Rubin Show, on my Facebook fan page, on my Tumblr, on my Instagram. It's a social media empire, and I'm growing it one follower at a time. What am I talking about? All right, I got to stop talking. I got to end the show, and I think I'm going to do that now.
That was a HeadGum podcast.